نعقده اليوم من العاصمة الإدارية الجديدة عقب اجتماع مجلس الوزراء.
After the meeting of the ministerial cabinet, and at the outset, let me begin with an important event that happened this week, which is the elections of the Senate. The elections, as you followed, started for Egyptians abroad over 2 years and then kicked off in Egypt in the last 2 days. The Senate, as we always reiterate, is complementary to the legislative framework and the legislative life in Egypt. It is the center for ideas. It is the brain for the nation. It supports the House of Representatives in passing resolutions, and they have some kind of idea and opinion and recommendations that we respect in regards to executive plans. The country's role at the moment is to concentrate on organizing elections and to make sure that there is close coordination with the National Authority for Elections, and thank God it went smoothly. It was stable and there were many people that casted the ballot. This is why I want to extend my thanks to the National Authority for Elections for organizing this event, and the upcoming elections will be for the House of Representatives. I'd like also to thank the citizens that exercise their right in voting, their constitutional right. Let me jump to something else that is going to occupy us as Egyptians. The topic is humanitarian assistance, and as you followed yesterday, there was a bilateral meeting between President Sisi and his counterpart from Vietnam. Our president reiterated that Egypt exerted an awful lot of effort to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza, and we told you that over the last few days thousands of trucks managed to reach Kerem Shalom crossing to enter the Gaza Strip. Some of them already entered and the rest is still waiting on the crossing. The Egyptian state is also trying to use the air drops, not only the land assistance, in coordination with other countries. So there are multiple efforts through land and air for multiple kinds of assistance for our brothers in Gaza. The other thing that I want to announce today is agreeing on the date for the inauguration of the Egyptian Grand Museum, and it's going to be on Saturday, November 1st. And there was concentration with our fellow ministers and stakeholders to retrieve the executive steps to begin the inauguration of the Grand Egyptian Museum in a way that reflects the strength and history of Egypt. This is a present to the world, as we say, to introduce the great Egyptian civilization. Today in the meeting of the cabinet, I was very keen on underscoring for ministers and governors that we are working on the maintenance and operation of plants and utilities of infrastructure. Because as I said last time, during summer, there is pressure and extra load on plants, and we need to make sure there is efficiency and operation and maintenance, not to encounter any outage of the service. My directives were to ministers to intensify a revision process and to make sure that all systems, whether in electricity or water tubes and sanitation and electric grids, to be maintained on the highest levels, because we still have August and summer. We're only in the beginning, and it is expected for the temperature to increase. Maybe today, Minister of Electricity explained that in a single day we reached the highest point of consumption, that is 39,400 mega. And in a week last year, we exceeded this number. We hit a record. It was 38.2. We exceeded this number for a whole week until it reached 39.4. This is a burden and a load on our grids and plants. This is why I reiterated that the Egyptian state exerted much effort, and we created a system to make sure the process of delivering electricity is sustainable, and we didn't want the delay in the maintenance and operation to affect the overall service. The other thing is that we touched some complaints in summer. Those complaints were about irrigation, that many lakes do not get access to water. So some farmers in certain areas complain about water outage. And I'd like to reassure you that the system that we have is efficient, and the increase in consumption kicks off in May, and it reached the record or the peak in August or by the end of September. So this is the peak for the water consumption, and the Ministry of Water and Irrigation did its best in supplementing the necessary water resources. We are going to be clear, Egypt is working on rotational bases, whether they are consistent of 2 sides or 3 sides. So we let the water flow to a lake to use it to a certain region, and then we stop it in this area and move it to another spot. Subsequently, we cannot take a picture of a certain lake when it's empty and say there is no water, it's dry, because it is well known that Egypt is working for a rotational basis. The most important is that there were complaints about the delay and the purification process for some lakes, but it is the farmers' responsibility to do the purification on their own in some times of the year, and our ministry won't fall short in this. And to conclude, I want to tackle another topic that's been occupying the public opinion, that is the law for rent, for old rent. This is why I asked my brother from the Legislative Affairs to be with me today. But before I give him the floor, there are 2 events that took place. The first one is the conference for Egyptians abroad, and as you followed, His Excellency President is keen on our Egyptian people abroad as part and parcel in Egyptian soft power. The whole government was keen on being present to commend the role of Egyptians abroad and to ease the obstacles that they faced and that they pointed out with many ministers. It was my directive to our ministers to be always present with our people abroad to answer their concerns. The second thing is that this week, specifically on Thursday last week, there was the coordinative meeting of the Council of Fiscal Policy, and we reviewed the condition pertaining to our fiscal and financial policies, and we will continue on the structural reform program that we have been working on, and to follow up with the fund and to track the development that is taking place, making sure that we are paying off everything, specifically in the petroleum sector, to continue the governance of public investments, and we already achieved what we pledged to do in the last fiscal year. And the most important is that we reviewed the indicators of international debt and its ratio to GDP, and the bar that we wanted not to exceed the numbers agreed upon by the Council. The most important and biggest news made, the announcement made by our bank, is that our reserve exceeded 49 billion, and this happened due to the stability of our financial and fiscal policies. Let us read back to our colleague from the Legislative Order and Affairs, and he's the one specialized in the amendments on the rent law. The government was well aware that this topic is complicated and that it's been there for 60 years. We encountered a cause that's been long avoided by previous governments. It was in parallel with the Constitutional Court proceeding that it is vital to find a solution as soon as possible, and this is why from day one we sought to pass this law and to make those alignments between owners and tenants. But we announced some critical points that the state is going to provide alternatives for those housing units for people who will have a difficult time, for tenants who are not able to deal with the increase in their rent. And His Excellency Minister will delve into details and will answer all questions, but we announced this principle and the mechanisms are already in the articles of law. The second thing that is being said, as I follow social media, they say this government won't be there in 7 years. We are the ones that are going to be affected with the implications. And I tell you, it's not about the people in the government. It's not about individuals. This is about the state. This is our discipline. So if this is the approach adopted by the state, it will have nothing to do with the individuals that are in office in a certain period of time. So I'm reiterating, this is the state's approach, and all government will be keen on meeting those promises. And before I give His Excellency Minister the floor, what our President said, that I won't leave someone who deserves a housing unit be drowning in concern and worry. And this is what we directed for. There will be a meeting in the upcoming week on how to follow up the executive steps to revitalize the final draft. And I give you the floor, Mr. Minister. Thank you so much, Prime Minister. I think you mentioned most of the details. There is nothing left for me to say, but I'm going to answer some concerns for the Egyptian public opinion. So law number 164 for 2025 that has to do with rent and regulating the relation between owners and tenants. After lengthy discussions, the House of Representatives hearings on the General Assembly, we already announced the law of 10 articles. It was to tackle the problem of old housing units. It is correct that the Constitutional Court proceeding in November said that it is unconstitutional to keep the price or the rent stable, but it's not only about keeping the rent fixed. It needed some tackling, and this was shouldered by the government, by different entities that participated in passing this law. If we're going to talk about the positivities of this law, it put an end to empty units and to lack of maintenance, and also to the waste in housing units. However, I want to reassure everyone that there are some red lines. All contracts that were signed starting from January the 31st, 1996 won't be under this law. So the contract signed on January the 31st in the year 1996, regardless of the amount, it's going to remain effective, and it won't be under the articles that we're going to explain. Second, the contract before January the 31st, they have a different proceeding after 4 years for housing units and 5 years for non-housing units agreed upon by the legislator, and it is a logical period for every party to figure things out. And here I mean by parties the owner, the tenant, and even the government, as we are going to explain. The alignment of this relation does not mean evacuation or expulsion. It means that both parties are going to talk together to agree to the new rent and to the period of time or the term. And if it happened, the government or the state will not interfere. But if they couldn't reach an agreement, the law implies that the owner will retrieve their unit and that there will be alternatives or a number of options for the tenant. But if they agreed on the time, we will be in front of a new positive relation that is under the civil law. And accordingly, we want to make it clear there won't be forcible evacuation. It depends on a jurisdiction that is pursued by the owner after the end of the term agreed upon by law. That is 5 years for non-dwellable units and 4 years for dwellable units. I'm making it clear in the presence of Prime Minister. We reassure everybody that the state has a full commitment before the transitional period to provide alternative housing for people who deserve it. It is not possible that we leave any family or household without a place to stay the night. This won't be allowed by the government. And the current government, as people say, won't stay for 7 years. This is why we created the legislation, because regardless of the government, the legislation needs to be adopted and applied. So we're going to provide the biggest number of units, and all of them will be accessible after a certain period of time. It's not going to be applied tomorrow, but in 7 years. So throughout those 7 years, we have a time frame to see how it's going to be applied. His Excellency Prime Minister held multiple meetings before passing this legislation for it to reflect the earnestness of the government to have practical perspectives. The government is not biased. The government is impartial. We are tackling a chronic problem that's been there for dozens of years, and many countries tackled the same problem in the same manner as the Egyptian state. And we shouldered the hardest part of it by providing the alternative housing units. I want to point out that the contracts that are already ongoing were figured out. In 1992, there was an article that is pertaining to agricultural land, and those contracts were entered after 5 years, and this sparked controversy back then. And there is Article number 10 for 1922 that implied people need to evacuate if they are taken the housing unit for different purposes. Now we're talking about mutual interest. We need to make those alignments that were sparked from exceptional conditions. The final law came after lengthy discussions, and I'm reassuring you that every law that comes out is constitutional unless the constitutional courts see otherwise. It is what we call the need for verification from the Constitutional Court. And this law should be entered by August 5th, 2025. But some contracts say that the rent is going to be received by the 7th, 6th or 8th, but this is the exception starting from August. But let us make it easier for people. The general rule is that the rent is going to be due by September. For dwellable units, it's going to start from September. As I said, every unit is going to pay £250 on the spot till we classify those regions. And there are 3 spots: high level, medium, and low level. As for the high level, they are going to pay 20 times, and for medium regions, they are going to pay 10 times, and for the low income regions, they are going to pay 10 times. And then the least amount for this category will be £250. As for the others, they are going to pay 5 times the rent. We are still waiting for the classification, but there are units that are for human dwelling and units for other purposes. But generally speaking, the amount will be due by September unless there is nothing else stated in the contract. As for the mechanisms, there will be steps for the committees of tracking. It will include the general rules upon which committees around the state are going to work. And after this decision is made, every governor will make or shape those committees to work on the categorization process, taking into consideration the criteria agreed upon in the law. The term that we're expecting is 3 months. That can be extended to 6 months, but we reiterate that 3 months is enough. We're not going to start from scratch. As you will see, we're almost ready. And for the divisions made by those committees, they need to be rectified by the governor, and then they are going to be announced in our official newspapers. And the Ministry of Housing will forge an electronic platform to receive the complaints and concerns from people who were negatively affected by this legislation. And people who are not able to use this platform can submit forms in every office in the state. Their submissions will be looked upon in order, and it's going to be ready in different types. Nobody said that the alternative housing provided by the state will be of the same level. They're going to be high level, medium level, and low level, depending on the income. And there are multiple systems. It's either ownership or rent. And the amounts adopted in this program are not necessarily the same as social housing, as the purpose for this law is different. The mechanism is different, and the ages of people applying are different. People are concerned about the guarantees that they can offer. So the guarantee will be the unit itself. We are just here to reassure people that it is impossible for the state to allow anybody to be left without a housing unit. There is an example that I want to make in the program of Decent Life. We paid hundreds of billions without a commitment incurred on it, but out of the commitment we feel. And when the state put an end to the slums problem, we did it out of good faith. So the state that came up with both programs to eliminate slums and to provide a better life through the program of Decent Life will leave its people without a place to live. This is impossible, and this law is going to be effective and should be respected. What is going to guarantee that those committees are going to be impartial? Well, those committees won't have the mission of agreeing on a certain amount of rent. This is going to be decided by the law that already set the least amount that can be paid. They only categorize places into high, medium, and low. And people that are part of those committees cannot have first-degree relatives in the regions they are working on, and they are going to sign on documents guaranteeing that they have no relatives in those programs. There are people who are representing the Ministry of Housing and for real estate tax. So we're working with accuracy, and we have a large database. We're working around the clock, and I know the Prime Minister and the President know that those housing units are going to be handed as soon as possible. We won't wait till the end of the term of 7 years, as we want to reflect the honesty of the state in executing this program. The work is going to be recorded and documented and can be reread through a central record and database. I'd like to underscore that there are administrative jobs that are going to be under the eyes of our jurisdiction. Last but not least, there is Article 8 in the law that we gave the right to that tenant that's been there for long and their spouse, and those are commitments. If they cannot be achieved in a satisfactory manner, we will try to pursue those inherent right by law. And I'm reiterating, we didn't and we're not willing to reach this point. There will be a priority for all those negatively affected by this law and different units that have been announced. So the law is speaking about two levels. The first one is being worthy or deserving this unit, and this entitlement will be to everyone who's negatively affected and who submitted their request. And the first right will be for the first tenant and their spouse, because they underwent different circumstances, whether social or pertaining to age. And I'd like to reiterate the message made by His Excellency: no one should be left without a shelter, without a home. This is a chronic problem. Maybe what made it chronic to this extent that it's been left unsolved for decades. Maybe other countries like Morocco, Lebanon, Syria, Britain, France, Germany were aware of this problem, but historically speaking, it wasn't left unsolved. This kind of rent of those little amounts on a lengthy terms wasn't left to this time, but we appreciate the state's effort that were impartial, and I'm ready to answer any question. Let's start receiving your questions, and let's keep it for those who didn't ask before. I'd like to extend my thanks to you and to Councillor Mr. Mohammed Fawzi for explaining this law, but after the rectification of this law, some tenants say that the government was biased to owners, as before this law was passed. The tenant would have spoke to the owner, give him an amount of money, and then evacuate the property. But now the government will have this entitlement of providing the alternative housing unit, and they won't get the amount of money as a reparation. So tenants say, I could have got the amount by the owner, but the owner is no longer going to give it to me, and the government is not giving it to me. They say they could have obtained this amount to evacuate. So what is your response to this point? Yes, I give you the floor. I want to underscore one more time that the law, it's no longer the government. The law was completely impartial. It wasn't biased. It was neutral. There's something that's been given away from the tenant, owner, and government. So it is balanced. First, negotiation is always possible between all parties. If we are to touch back on Article 2, stating that the relation between both parties of the contract did not end in 5 or 7 years, this won't be happen unless there are friendly talks between both parties. This is not the rule, but there are owners who are going to keep the tenants as they have friendly relations, and they think that it is just. This law is pursuing satisfactory ending, not evacuation. So if both parties are come into terms, and if they are aligning together on a certain agreement, they will be allowed to do so. I want to recap here. It is quite the opposite. The market mechanisms can work smoothly, and it's been pointed out by the minister. If an owner wants and is willing to reinvest their asset or their property, it would be better for them not to wait for 7 straight years for his property to be evacuated. So they can offer the tenant an amount of money to evacuate as soon as possible, and then the tenant will be the beneficent here. So all mechanisms are built on satisfaction. But the question is how to move to secure both parties, and this is what we did by this law. I want to go off topic and speak about the statements you made last week that were Egypt encountering all economic difficulties, and this came in parallel with statements made by International Monetary Fund saying that the Egyptian growth is going to increase by the end of their entitlement to the fund. There were economic experts stating that the state needs a program for development and to extend their base, to invest more foreign investments, to attract them, and to tackle the ratio for inflation. So is there any national program that can be applied after the end of the entitlements to the International Monetary Fund? I said it before and I'm going to say it again. The current government is putting a clear prospect or vision by 2030, and the entitlements to the fund are going to end by 2026. So our vision is based on 2030 vision. It is in the framework of the foundations laid for our vision, and it is based on the developments around the world. It is being updated on a regular basis, and subsequently what we're doing now and what we're going to announce an agreement with our fellow ministers by the end of this year, there will be a comprehensive vision for the upcoming 5 years to anticipate how the economy is going to look. There will be a chart including the number of investments, whether foreign or domestic investments, all the figures, including the debt ratio in detail, will be reviewed and announced, covering the period of 5 years. I want to remind you that there was a program covering 3 years that was laid first, and we said it is temporary due to our conditions. It was till 2027. Today we're telling you that our vision became more comprehensive and is going to cover till 2030 based on the studies that we performed on different sectors. Let me, Mr. Prime Minister and Your Excellency, you spoke about data, that there needs to be data to reassure people. So to what extent are those data available at the moment? The second question is about the committees that are going to categorize the units as per level, high, medium and low, and this is going to reflect the rent itself or the amount people are going to pay. Are there any unified criteria that those committees are going to work upon? How are they going to decide which unit shall be given to a citizen or not? We need a framework to agree on the rent to reassure people they are going to afford it. So what are the criteria? Maybe people are concerned that they're not going to afford the new alternative unit. We just want to reassure them and to answer their concerns, and thank you. Thank you for your question. It is valid, and we spoke about it before. So when this law was discussed and eventually passed, was it without data and statistics? No, we had data and statistics made by CAPMAS in the last tracing of 2017. Those statistics made it clear that there are categories. At first, we managed to decide on the units and their number, that is 1.6 million units. And this number, as I mentioned before, means that the state is going to provide similar units in the upcoming 7 years. So the question, are we obligated to provide this 1.6 million? Absolutely not, but less than that. As when the problem started in 2007, it was different from it in few years. Every year has its own data. How are we going to know it accurately? It is going to be through the platform where we're going to upload all forms and all requests made by post offices. And once again, when the government suggested this, we had the biggest figure here, that is 1.6. So we are working to provide this number, and if not, it won't cause any problem. So in 2027, there will be a new study and statistics by CAPMAS, and I think against the backdrop of this mission, the problem is going to be tackled. They're going to concentrate on collecting data. And we used official data and statistics, and with the biggest number that we managed to provide, but in the upcoming years it's going to be less. The second question is about criteria. It was made by this law in Article 3. It said there are criteria that are geographical region, that is the nature of a street, the average level of property, utilities like water, electricity, gas and phone, the roads, educational and health services. So villages are different from cities, and low income neighborhoods are different from the most sophisticated neighborhoods. So it's going to be a binding decision for all committees with the criteria that they are going to follow, and it's going to give rubrics. They won't act haphazardly. It will be on a point basis. So if a criteria is applied, they are going to provide a certain unit from a category, and there will be guarantees for that. After passing this law, there are houses for celebrities like Abdul Halim Hafiz that became a place for people to visit. How are you going to deal with those units? You said the houses of celebrities? Yes, they became museums now. How are you going to deal with that? This is a tricky question. The question is the house owned or rented? Is it publicly owned or privately owned? If it is under the state, it will have a certain law as a historical place. If it is privately owned, we will respect this private ownership and they will have the law applied on them. But some conditions will require the state to inspect places one by one. I cannot give you a general answer. It is a one-by-one basis, but we want to make this distinction between private and public ownership. This is a restriction that those buildings cannot be destroyed without certain rulings, and His Excellency Prime Minister is the one specialized in this, but they cannot be infringed or touched. Other than that, no one is going to cause any harm to those buildings, and it may require the state to interfere, maybe to move the amount of this rent. Here I want to point out something. Generally speaking, it's not about celebrities. Any building that has a historical value won't be destroyable as per order of their owners. It will happen through negotiations. Owners won't freely have all entitlements to do whatever they wish to the building. It's going to remain established and it's going to be on the ground. There will be a perspective on how to make use of those assets. Like, people think we're going to destroy this building to build something commercial. No, it's completely different. And in certain conditions that happened in the past, we tackled them differently. On the ground, when we begin the work, there will be different states and conditions, and we're going to deal with them separately. We only have time for 2 questions. I want to thank you for passing this law, and for the committee that is going to assess. People were concerned that it's going to be domestic or local, but as His Excellency stated, it's going to include individuals from different entities. We're not willing to repeat the experience of other buildings that were built illegally. The question now, after exerting those efforts by the government and contracting, the stance now to secure the needs of Egyptians from energy and electricity are stable, right? I will need more information on how Egypt amended the program of supply chains. We delayed some cargoes to September and so on. What is your take on this? Well, today we have a stable system that is secure in Egypt in the upcoming 4 or 5 years for gas supplements. This is why we are secure against any scenario. We used to get natural gas resources from neighboring countries. Then if there is maintenance or higher consumption, we will have a shortage. But nowadays we have our ships for gas, and even those ships are temporary. till we reach back to our domestic potential of industry and mining. Our foreign partners are now returning to the mining effort after they managed to repay the bills. And today they know that those mining efforts are going to lead to a lot of achievements in the upcoming years, and we know when we are going to be sufficient even without those gas ships. Today we are aware of when we need those cargoes. It's not only about direct decisions. Now, after I have the vision, I can make an auction and I can know how can I get cargoes for the upcoming year with the best conditions. Now we took this procedure temporarily with higher prices to secure the instant needs of our people. But now we have the potential with those ships to contract on the period of 3 years with better conditions, whether in the terms of repaying or in the contraction conditions. You said we delayed it, but no, we did not delay anything. Now we are more aware of our needs, and thank God, after we got those ships and after it entered to Al-Aqaba port and it started working as an emergency response ship, and after this extensive load we did not hit the record. We have enough room and space to secure this number, and God willing, temperature is not going to increase